Hey there, it's Brittany. I'm going to be working on a new cosplay in this video. The goal is for San Diego Comic Con. It's March. Who knows what's going to happen? The world's falling apart. I am going to be making the lion head from the Harry Potter series. My goal is to make it look like the one that's in the movie, since that's the one that people kind of have a visual of, versus the one that is in the book that you kind of made up in your mind. This is what I'm hoping it ends up looking like. This first video, I'm going to do a two-part series, is just going to be like making the foundation of it. It's going to be pretty much like a time lapse of that. I'll kind of talk over the parts that I do, but for the most part, it's just like making a frame. And then I'm going to do a second part that is the finishing touches and details and things like that, because as I've been working on it, I'm realizing that this would be like a 45-minute long video if I did it all at once. So feel free to skip through this. If you want to find out the informational parts, maybe I'll put them in the description box of like, hey, here's the next part. Otherwise, it's just going to be a nice little time lapse of me sawing away at styrofoam. Let me know what you think.
The main part of this is going to be a styrofoam ball glued to this hat. I started off by sawing away at the bottom of the styrofoam in order to make it sit a little more flush on the head. Then I glued the styrofoam to the hat with hot glue. I used tinfoil to fill in the gap between the styrofoam and the hat. For the front of the snout, I used some scrap fabric that I rolled up inside tinfoil to create two balls, which I then glued to the front of the hat / styrofoam ball. Using pieces of scrap styrofoam, I cut out some shapes for the nose and the sides and top of the snout. To start carving the shape of the head, I used a Sharpie just to outline the general places that I knew I would need to cut away at. And then I did that with a knife and also a Dremel later on. Here I'm just using some of the fabric to make sure that it looked like a nose. Here I'm just adding some eyebrow shape, so when the fabric goes over the top, there'll be a bit more definition there. Here I noticed that the head was too far up on the hat and wasn't going to hit where I wanted it to, so I actually took it off of the hat, which was a lot more trouble than I thought it was going to be, and carved away more of the head. After I was done carving, I went ahead and glued everything back on. I then used some more scrap fabric and tinfoil to create a little piece to fill up the gap between the front of the snout and the actual face. Next, I started working on pattern drafting. I started by measuring the shape of the nose and creating a pattern with some seam allowance that would fit over the front of the nose. Next, I did a lot of draping to figure out how to cover the front snout to match the one that is from the movie. The rest of the head was pretty much done all with draping, so I used a piece of fabric, drew where I wanted things to hit, and then cut parts of the fabric out, would pin it together, put it back on top of the head, see how it laid, keep going from there until I pretty much finished. I did add a dart on the side of the face to help it wrap around the actual shape of the head. Once I had the shape that I liked, I unpinned everything, created a second side headpiece for the other side of the head, cut out all of the pieces. I sewed the front of the snout together first, so the two front bowl shapes and the nose. Then I attached the top of the nose to the top of the snout. Sewed the darts on the sides of the head. And then pinned and sewed the side pieces onto the snout pieces. I did some final draping to make sure everything looked right, and then afterwards I undid everything with a seam ripper so I could cut out the final pieces for my real fabric, which will be shown in part 2.